Hello and welcome to Global Digest, your light-hearted look at current affairs around the world. I am Ama Marcus. Fierce protests across Kenya, a violent crackdown by police and the worst unrest since President William Ruto came into power less than 2 years ago. But it was all triggered by the government's efforts to increase taxes to help cut national debt and pay back its lenders, including China and the International Monetary Fund. Well, President Ruto said yesterday he was prepared for a conversation with the thousands of young people who demonstrated around the country. Well, the demonstrators who started their protest on Tuesday claim that President Ruto's administration has reneged on its promise to cut living taxes and expenses. Let's listen in.
I'm telling William Ruto, if you continue imposing taxes against the hustlers whom you swore to protect, time is coming that we are going to lead a serious revolution against your government, and we are going to make sure that we get you out of that office.
Tunakufa, hatuwezi afford kula mara tatu kwa siku bwana. Ruto. Hatukuli mara tatu. Sasa faida gani tuna respect Ruto? Ruto aende. Ruto go.
Very peaceful. We don't have anything. We are just posting pictures, and you can see they're throwing tear gases, and we're holding nothing. So that just shows you how crazy they are. But I think it's time for Kenya to change because they're used to our parents who just never questioned them. Our parents were scared of them. We are not scared of them.
Well, so why has this bill brought so much anger, and what are the wider implications? Joining us this morning from Nairobi is Dr. Halkano Abdi Wario from the Institute of Security Studies. Hello, Mr. Wario. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here. I'm delighted to inform your audience about the ongoings in Kenya. In the last couple of days, especially from last Thursday onward, there's been an unprecedented level of public demonstration, especially being held by young people who are below the age of 40, who are popularly known as Generation Z here in Kenya. Unlike the demonstrations before, the level of interest by the younger people within the country on finance bill that is currently under debate has put the country's leadership under strict kind of measure. This demonstration actually are around the current finance bill that is hopefully going to be passed by next week, but the large number of people claim that the taxation that have been put in this bill are punitive, are uncalled for, and especially in an economy that's already feeling the pitch of previous taxation that the current regime had put in place from 2023. And therefore, we're seeing these demonstrations being a countrywide kind of phenomenon. It's not necessarily restricted to Nairobi only. And it's organized by younger people, and it's often done via Twitter, Facebook, and other social media. Back to you.
Okay, so I have to ask, why is the Kenyan government raising taxes at this time?
That's a very good question. Kenya has been having huge amount of sovereign debts they owe to China, they owe to United States, they owe to other European countries, and up to around 58% of Kenya's revenue goes towards financing of this debt. If the country doesn't pay this debt, then it might default on it, and it will have much more higher repercussion on the country's economy. And therefore, in order to fill that deficit, the current government felt that they can raise taxes on a lot of issues that Kenya considered dear to them, including bread, including fuel, including taxes on motor vehicle and others. So the main reason is in the previous administration, excessive borrowing that were done by the previous administration to develop key infrastructure projects like road, railway, and others literally meant that the country has to use much of its resources in order to finance payment of debt. So the only place where the government felt that they can find easy money in order to finance the deficit is tax the people more. And that is why these taxes have been raised. And again, of course, for the public, they also feel that the level of corruption, the excessive spending by personnel associated with the current administration actually, calls into question why can't the government actually first and foremost look at austerity measures that have been introduced by IMF to find ways of reducing the cost of administration rather than going back to the people and taxing them more.
Okay, so let's look at the finance, economic situation that have led Kenya to this point. What do you think the government should have done better so it would not result in this current situation?
There are a couple of things that economists have suggested as a way out of this. One of which is, how do you ensure that you cut down on government expenditure? For instance, there have been claims among the public that the president has visited over 62 countries in a span of 21 months. There's a lot of allocations that have been done to offices that were not necessarily elected, like the office of the spouse of the president, the spouse of the deputy president, the spouse of the cabinet secretary. Generally, there's a feeling that if the expenditure within the larger government activities are done better, then there's a way in which the country will have done better. Again, one of the areas that will have formed a good way to address this is when the government entered into agreement with International Monetary Fund, they should have negotiated for a better way of payment of debts and also the tax regime that they can introduce. At the moment, it looks as if much consultations were not done, both with the international lenders that had given the government money, the international monetary funds that have called for introduction of strict austerity measures, and again, the public participation on what are possible areas where the government can find funds in order to finance the deficit that they face. So in the end, what we felt was the larger public expressed dissatisfaction with introduction of wide raft of taxes. And these taxes were not just introduced in 2024, 2025 budget, but were introduced in the first budget that were done by the current government. This is a government that came into power on a very pro-poor agenda, and they came into power by trying to lift the affairs of the common people. We call them here in this region wananchi, and so the president appealed to border riders like the Nigerian version of Okada, the people who usually manage the public taxis, the women who sell vegetables in market. So it came on a platform of trying to raise the living standards of the ordinary people. And in fact, when you look at the campaign rhetorics of the current government, it was so much pro-poor that there's a big narrative around the hustler, around the common people who wanted to be uplifted out of it. Then just a couple of months into power, when the first budget came, we saw a complete turnaround where we saw introduction of the housing tax and a number of other taxes. Then this year, the new finance bill, in order to look at how the government can continue to raise funds, introduced even much more taxes. So the general atmosphere felt that there's wide range of public outcry around the complete turnaround between the campaign promises vis-a-vis the actual running of the administrative structures in Kenya.
Okay, so let's take a look at the Finance Bill of 2023. Well, we saw that taxes were imposed on various items, which included housing. Well, these new taxes are targeting other sectors like imported goods and petroleum products. Now, how does the government decide what to tax in its latest effort to raise revenue?
One of the ways I look for funds is tax the things that are commonly used by many people. So they will go for milk, they'll go for bread, they'll go for sugar, they'll go for fuel, because the economies of scale means that if you can add 1 shilling or a couple of naira in the case of Nigeria, then you can get much more number of funds that can easily be done. But then if you look at the current proposal, there were a lot of taxes that had implication on importation of goods. For instance, there is an introduction of something called eco tax, where goods that are manufactured from outside that has implication on environment attracted huge amount of taxes, and these affects common things like diapers that children use, mothers use in order to keep their children, sanitary needs of their children. So issues such as sanitary pads for women and girls that are often imported from outside are attracting much more taxes. The government even proposed that every person who owns private car must pay 25% of their car value every year as part of motor vehicle tax. This is unprecedented anywhere in this region. So you can imagine every year when you go and renew your insurance, you're expected to pay 25% of the value of your car to the government as part of motor vehicle tax, just to own your car. There was also a very punitive introduction of the national government, the National Revenue Authority, called Kenya Revenue Authority, that collects taxes. They were asking to have access to taxpayers' data. So in case you transact on mobile money transfer, the government needs to know, where did you get this money from? Did you pay tax on it? So allowing government entities to bypass the personal, private data protection laws in order to have access to the transaction that individuals do on every basis, of which a lot of this money have already been taxed as salaries, money you could be sending to your relative somewhere else, or money that you receive from your relative from outside that already attracts taxes. So there were quite huge range of taxes, including on petroleum products and others. By and large, again, there were also allocations for renovation of state lodges. So, for instance, our current president and also the former president always had access to a number of state houses across the country. So there were a lot of money that were allocated towards renovation of this. A lot of money allocated towards renovation of the house of the deputy president, for instance. But when you look at now the allocation for other very priority areas, such as school feeding programs, such as education, such as medical students who finish and who want to become doctors, almost all these are being contested, while at the same time we've seen excess focus on recurrent expenditures that are not necessarily of interest.
So, Dr. Wario, you have listed a couple of taxes in the past and, of course, the current ones. But what exactly about these new taxes is prompting such a response, considering other taxes did not incite this kind of similar reaction?
So, if you can put it into perspective, is when the new government came into power in September 2022, they came on a platform of trying to address this issue. There was already feeling among the general Kenya population that the government of Uhuru Kenyatta had introduced huge amount of taxes. So when the taxation continued, and then it's affecting the level of people to have the purchasing power that they will have on every day. So the economies of individuals, the money that they have, they can disposably use to sustain their life, increasingly becoming smaller and smaller. There was, of course, public outcry. And this outcry is a kind of pent-up pressure over the last 20 months or so, where individuals no longer have ability to continuously live the life that they can live comfortably in Kenya, as the taxes are increasingly eating into their own earnings, and they do not find opportunity for instance, doing online business. By the way, there was also a lot of taxes on digital content creation, for instance. One of the things that Kenyan youth have been known for is ability to work remotely for companies that are based in Europe or Asia. So most of these hustles that are ordinarily giving young people an opportunity to earn are increasingly, again, being looked at by the government as an opportunity for removing more taxes from them. So when the buying power, the ability of people to sustain their life increasingly becoming tougher due to introduction of more and more taxes, we've seen now the younger people starting the demonstration, and more older people also increasing in it. But then if you reflect within the legislative structure in Kenya, the current finance bill was in the second reading on Thursday last week. And when it was voted, 204 members of the parliament voted in support of the bill, while 115 voted against. But then you look at the public outcry against that show of power by the government in the parliament vis-a-vis the public outcry is a whole complete different picture. The youths have gone to threaten that these individuals who voted no again, yes, for the bill will have to be subjected to very strict electoral review, and that chances of them coming back to parliament will be higher. What we are seeing is, though it started off as a protest against the taxes, it's increasingly getting a life of its own as a kind of vote of no confidence within the administrative structures we have in Kenya.
Okay. So is it possible, I'm wondering, is it possible for this finance bill to be amended to remove some controversial measures, or such as the proposed tax? We're looking at measures such as the proposed tax on menstrual products and nappies and bread. Well, they were dropped due to these protests. How much of this, these taxes that were dropped is a victory for the protesters? And is there a possibility for more of these changes, as President Trudeau has, said he is open to having a conversation with protesters?
So initially, the government felt that they're not going to talk to these demonstrators at all. So the Generation Z demonstrators they said, we will go ahead because we need to raise the funds in order to pay our debt. But last Thursday, thousands of young people descended in the city. They were armed only with their phones. They did not violently attack any businesses. They were largely very peaceful. And the police also acted to a large extent in a very peaceful way. Of course, in the evening, there were 2 people who were killed. And when this pressure was too much on Thursday, the government introduced a couple of concessions. One of which was they say we are going to remove the 2.5% motor vehicle tax that we introduced, let that go. They also tried to address the issue of VAT on sugar, on bread, on financial transactions, the mobile money transfers, on foreign exchange transactions. These were all dropped. They also said they were going to drop the eco levy fund that's going to affect diapers and sanitary pads and other things. They also said that the Kenya Revenue Authority, the tax collecting authority in Kenya, is not going to have access to personal data of the taxpayers. These concessions, despite the fact that they looked quite genuine and good ground, for the demonstrators, they only had one message: reject, do not amend. So for them, unless the whole entire bill is recalled and reworked in line with the realities that we have on the ground, then there is nothing that can be said by the government that will make them leave the streets. And this, I think, is a very clear message that may be, again, expressed much more tomorrow. I think tomorrow is a very unprecedented historical moment in Kenya's demonstration and history of protest. So the 3rd reading of the bill will be in the parliament, and youths across the country in major cities, Nairobi, Naivasha, Nakuru, Eldoret, Mombasa, name it, are going to demonstrate, are going to occupy the city, are going to come all the way to the parliament and try to occupy the parliament and tell them, look, the government, just remove this bill, let's rework it, let's have it better. Will the government do that? I highly doubt so. But I think tomorrow is going to be a moment to watch, because it might see a more kind of historical breakdown between the government and public relation in terms of how they can manage this demonstration.
Dr. Wario, when you spoke earlier, you said the protest has taken on the cause on its own cause. And one of the reasons protesters said they are out in the streets is due to the corruption in the government. Now, does the government appear in any way to want to address this issue, or is the focus just on the bill?
In Kenya, there are many statutory bodies that deal with dealing with corruption. There is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Authority. There is the Directorate of Criminal Investigation. There is the Office of. There are a number of entities that are expected to deal with corruption issues, but at the same time, there is the public court as far as how the government has fared in addressing the problem of corruption. And these are 2 different pictures. On one hand, we have statutory bodies that are expected to address issues of corruption. On the other hand, what does the public think the government is doing as far as corruption is concerned? In the public court, the government's war against corruption is a defeated one. So the general public do not feel that the government has done much in order to address excesses within its own institution. For instance, you will see very key personalities very close to the president doing fundraisings for churches, for schools, often carrying huge amount of funds and displaying excessive very primitive accumulative culture as far as looting of public resources. So for the public, they feel this government has not done much. They have collected a lot last year. Perhaps they say that they did not find much after Uhuru has left, but what are they doing in addressing the excessive expenditure within its own circle? Let's take an example of a very controversial cabinet position called Cabinet Administrative Secretaries, who are just under the ministers. And we have prime secretaries already who are dealing with different ministries. So the government, for instance, forcefully passed over 30 or 40 administrative posts under the ministers in order to fund individuals who are very close to them during the election period. So for a country that already is trying to address ways of collecting more funds, and on the other hand, the public do not feel as if much has been done. One of the areas, for instance, the public outcry is also very much prominent is when key government officials, including the president, will do huge number of international travels or host huge number of international presidents and prime ministers to come in the country for an economy that is expected to be on recovery mode. So the picture that we see is, on one hand, in the eyes of the youth, they feel that excessive spending is done. Again, key government officials are also flossing wealth that they are quickly accumulating within the few period they have been in power, and they feel the corruption war has not been, fought very well.
So these protests, which started last Tuesday, has resulted in 2 fatalities, and there are reports that live bullets were used, with police being criticized for their use of force. However, how does this compare to other cases worldwide where police use of force is being criticized?
Yeah, so 2 people died, 2 young men died on Thursday evening. That was around maybe 8 p.m. in the evening, after the parliament had voted overwhelmingly to pass the bill. And there were confrontation throughout the day in and around the parliament, in and around other critical infrastructures in Nairobi. In comparison with previous engagement between the public and the police, maybe the excesses were not as much as that, but at the same time, the level of violence that was often meted by the police against these peaceful protesters can be considered to be worrying. There were statements from the African Union. There are also condemnation from the Amnesty International and other human rights bodies about how the police have actually been the main cause of violence rather than the protesters. And again, unlike other previous demonstrations in Kenya and perhaps in most parts of the world, these protesters have been largely peaceful, and have relied on the power of the camera in order to broadcast their protest to the world. So, but again, the hard-handedness has been felt, especially after the violence, after the protest. So over the weekend, there have been a number of arrests of the people whom they consider to be the key leaders of this demonstration. Some have been held in Comunicado and then released. Others have been in police cells and have been released on bails. But we are seeing from the perspective of analysis that these excesses are not in any way reducing the ability of these youth to demonstrate. In any case, it may make the violence to become much more pronounced. In comparison with other countries, perhaps I think this is a lesson that the younger people can always rely on, as far as using ways of mobilizing on social media and being non-violent, but at the same time expressing their political will in a way that is legitimate, in a way that is again authoritative, speaking to those in power.
So let's go back to the economy now. What are the potential consequences for Kenya if it fails to repay this loan?
Key thing first, if this bill passes, chances of this demonstration going on is very high, and this may again translate into a kind of less and less support for the government over the years, and perhaps as a government that will want to ask for re-election next election 2027, they might face very hostile electorate that may not want to vote for them again. On the other hand, Kenya is a very regional hub for big companies across the world. So a lot of investors may feel that this might not be a very interesting economy to invest in, and therefore we may see over time, people who want to take their money elsewhere or become jittery around the Kenya's economy. And again, this might have very direct bearing on our foreign exchange. For instance, the Kenya US dollar exchange at the moment is extremely favorable. It has come down by over 30 shillings over the last couple of months. So the investor confidence may be something that's at stake. But again, at the same time, if this bill is revised in a way that is in line with the public understanding of how taxes can be collected, we might have a very vibrant understanding of how the economy can again grow. But one thing I think that has been made very clear is the young people are increasingly interested in matters of economy and politics at a level that has not been witnessed before.
Okay. Dr. Wario, thank you for joining us this morning and giving us those updates. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, joining us from Nairobi, Kenya was Dr. Halkano Abdi-Wario. He is from the Institute of Security Studies, and he was giving us an update on the current situation on the protest in Kenya.